Okay, in this video we're going to talk about quadratic functions and how to solve them by factoring. Now again, let's go over quickly what does it mean to solve a quadratic function. We have to do a couple of things. We have to talk about what is a quadratic. Okay, so we're going to answer that question. So what is a quadratic? And then what does it mean to solve a quadratic? Okay, so those are like two questions that we should really cover. And then finally, I'm going to show you how to do it by factoring, to solve by factoring. All right, so real quickly, let's go over that. Now, what is a quadratic function? Remember that a quadratic function is anything that has a degree of 2. A degree of 2. Remember that a 2 means that the exponent, the highest or largest exponent in the quadratic is a 2. So for example, x squared is equal to y would be a quadratic because the largest exponent is a 2. X squared minus 4 is equal to 0 would be a quadratic because the largest exponent is 2. X squared minus 3x minus 10 is equal to 0 is also quadratic because the largest exponent is 2. Okay? Now, this just happens to be a monomial. This happens to be what they call a binomial because there are two terms there. So this is just a little bit extra here. And this is what they call a trinomial because there are 3 terms there. Okay, so I'm going to actually focus on trinomials in the rest of this problem. Now, to solve a quadratic means that you are trying to find the x-intercepts. Find the x-intercepts. Remember that quadratics always, anything with a degree of 2, I should say, always produces a parabola, right? Something that looks like that, or it can actually go upside down as well, all right? So when you have this parabola, you can actually cross the x-axis once, twice, or not at all. So here's an example. If I had a quadratic, notice that it's crossing the x-axis twice, right? The degree of 2 tells you that there are 2 possible times, 2 possible solutions. Those are also called roots to solving the quadratic. All right. You can also have a quadratic that only covers or touches the x-axis one time, or you can also have a quadratic that doesn't cross the x-axis at all, right? So 2 possible, that's why we say 2 possible solutions. It doesn't have to have exactly 2 answers, but it can have 2 answers as the maximum. So twice, once, or not at all. Now finally, so that's how you solve a quadratic, is just finding where the x-intercepts are. We're going to focus on these 2 specifically, and then finally we're just going to do it by factoring. You'll remember that in a previous video we talked about how to solve a quadratic by the quadratic formula. So that is one method, quadratic formula. And that was x was equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And the a and the b and the c were simply the coefficients in the quadratic itself. Okay, so that's one way to solve it. So this is one method, right? But the second method that we're going to use is factoring. All right, so let me show you how to do factoring because that's really the point of this video. I'm going to do the simplest one possible. Not the simplest one possible, but one of the simple ones. So let's just use a trinomial, x squared minus 3x minus 10 is equal to y, all right? Because you know usually x and y on an x and y axis. The first thing you need to do, step 1, is to make the y equal 0. Make y equal to 0. So that's always the first thing. Now, why is that? Well, let's just take a quick look at a possible solution, okay? We're solving for the x-intercepts. And if you think about it, the y value, remember here's the y-axis right here. Here's y is -1, y is -2, y is -3. Here's y is +1, +2, +3. But right here, what is y equal to? Y is always equal to 0, isn't it? So if we're looking for where the x-intercepts are, and this is an x and y coordinate, the y always has to be 0. All right, so the first thing is to do is to make y equal to 0. So let's just do that. X squared minus 3x minus 10 is equal to wherever y is 0. All right? Step 2. Now, what is step 2? You have to ask yourself a question. What are two factors of -10 that add up to -3? Let me say that again. Remember that a factor are two multiplications, right? Two numbers that you multiply one another by. So what times what equals -10? So what number or factor, multiplied by another factor or by another number or factor add up to the linear coefficient. Okay, now we need some terms in here, don't we? You're always going to go to the constant, the -10, the last number, and ask yourself what times what equals -10. But when you add those two factors, you get -3. So what we have to do is we have to factor -10, right? So step 3. What are the factors of the constant? It's always the last number there, right? So in this case, it happens to be -10, right? So I know that, let me see, 1 times -10 gives me -10, but when I add those, I get -9, so that doesn't work. Let's try 2. How about 2 times -5? Well, 2 times -5 is equal to -10, but when I add them, aha, I get -3. So these are the two factors I need. So step 4, put them in what we call two different parentheses. And so you get a +2 and a -5. Always put the two factors at the end of these two little binomials. And in the front, you're going to put the x. All right? Now, watch what happens when I do this. I will go ahead and multiply these out to see if I will come up with the quadratic. Remember, this is just a simple FOIL. X times x, x squared. X times -5, -5x. +2 times x plus 2x, and then +2 times -5 is -10. Let's add up the like terms. I get x squared. Add these two guys, you get 3x, perfect. -10, perfect. So these are the two factors that I want. Now, step 5, almost done now. In order to solve this, x plus 2, x minus 5 equals 0. Those are the two correct factors for this. One of these has to be 0, doesn't it? Because in order for something to equal 0, one of the two factors has to be 0. Because 0 times anything will be equal to 0. That's called the zero property of multiplication. So let's make this one equal to 0 first. X plus 2. What x do I need to make x plus 2 equal to 0? Negative 2, don't I? So let's just make x equal to negative 2. When I go negative 2 plus 2, it gives me 0. Negative 2 minus 5 is negative 7. 0 times negative 7 is 0. So this one works. Now let's flip it to this other side. What's going to make this equal to 0? Positive 5, isn't it? So let's go with 5 minus 5 is 0. 5 plus 2 is positive 7. 7 times 0, again, is 0. Here are my two possible x's that will solve this equation. And as a matter of fact, these are the solutions right here, or the roots. You have just solved it. This is where my parabola will cross the x-axis at positive 5. So this would be right here. It'd be 5, and again 0, and negative 2, 0. Okay? So again, let's just go through those steps. Step 1, take your quadratic, set it equal to 0. We do that. Ask yourself, what two numbers, when I multiply them, will give me the constant term, so the negative 10 or whatever the number is, but when I add them, I'll get the linear coefficient. And you're going to have to go through a number of guesses to get that, okay? Once you've got those, put them into two binomials, put them in the end, put the x's there, check your answer with a FOIL to make sure that you're doing the correct trinomial or quadratic, and then just go ahead and do the zero property. Make this 0, choose whatever that x is, make this 0, choose whatever that x is, and then those become your roots or your answer. Okay, I hope that was helpful.